All right, good evening. Welcome in. We are live before lock, just under an hour to hit every possible angle for this basketball game on this slate tonight, game 3 of the NBA Finals. We're in Milwaukee for it, not physically, of course, but the series is, and we'll just see how things shake out and where the best angles are from the top to the bottom. It is not me, of course, Greg Ehrenberg here to answer as many questions as you possibly have on both the super chat, the chat's up and running, the premium Slack as well. We'll tell you all about Monkey Knife Fight, our sponsor for tonight's program. Make sure you say what's up to Jordan. He's producing the show and looking over on the chat as well. And then fresh off, I'm sure, a very busy weekend is one Greg Ehrenberg.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to say it. It's so actually for me, so I have tomorrow is one of my brother's birthdays, and I have my other brother's birthday was on Thursday, and then it was one of my best friend's birthdays yesterday. So it's a lot of birthdays together, but I had fun last night. We had a bunch of people go over to one of my friends' houses yesterday for my friend's birthday. We watched the McGregor card together, and Conor McGregor's leg snapped in half. Greg Hardy got knocked out. I feel like a lot of things I like to see happen. So yeah, overall, it's been a good weekend.
You didn't mention the ESPYs. You weren't like on the hovering of the edge of your couch watching that as well?
I did not know those existed. I had no clue that happened. You just broke the news to me. The ESPYs happened. My information about the ESPYs, that's all I know is what you just told me.
I love it. The only way I knew it existed is because some stupid joke about Ben Simmons went viral on social media. But other than that, I figured maybe, just maybe, you were clicking around. But look, from McGregor's leg snapping in half, and the Greg Hardy might have been just the ultimate justice right there, getting his ass knocked out. And then, of course, we lead right up to this game, which I know you are super thrilled to end your weekend with, this gigantic game 3 tonight.
Yeah, so it's interesting from a DFS perspective. And then also, a lot of people know about my rooting interest in the Suns at this point. I'm still, I think a lot of people have kind of written the Bucks off in the series. I don't feel the same way at this point. If you look at some of the luck stats from last game, the Bucks generate a lot more open looks than the Suns did last game. The Bucks just happened to miss their shots, and the Suns made harder shots. Now they're up 2-0 in the series. So, overall, I feel pretty good about the Suns' chance of winning. But still, the Bucks open as 3.5-point favorites in this game. The line has since been bet to 4.5. I think the Bucks have, a pretty good chance to win games 3 and game 4 at home. So the series is certainly far from over. However, I think due to the situation we have in the series, it's going to make for some very interesting lineup decisions that Budenholzer, I think, is likely to make. And I think it's going to impact the slate a lot. And something I'm kind of using as a guideline for my minutes for the Bucks here is we saw them in the same situation last series or 2 series ago. They were against the Nets. And they were down 2-0 in the series. We saw the Bucks head back home for game 3, and they basically played their starters almost the entire game and didn't really utilize their bench all that much. So I'm expecting something similar to happen tonight.
So the game itself, just before we get into the rotation, because I think that's really interesting as we get closer to lock tonight. It wasn't really a general theme, I think, leading into this game as far as how to approach that. But you raise a really good point that I think is worth exploring, especially because I think it might be a pretty good angle for victory tonight for people that may not have been paying close enough attention to it. But you just mentioned as far as, and look, from your gigantic tickets, I'm riding 2 much smaller tickets, but there's Suns 4-2, and Suns laying the 1.5. So I'm biased like you are as far as when it comes to the bet slips with it. But I'm also realistic with you, which is I would not be shocked if we headed back to Phoenix game 5 tied. With that said, as much as I don't see Phoenix blowing Milwaukee out, just looking at your thoughts to victory tonight, I could see, again, a tight game. You mentioned the looks that Milwaukee was generating, but the talent that Phoenix has, especially defensively, I wouldn't be shocked either if we sat here at the end of the night with Phoenix getting a 1-2 point victory, maybe even forcing overtime and getting it. That's really the only way I see Phoenix getting a victory, is if they just keep it close or have some sort of big comeback with Milwaukee up.
Yeah, or I mean, if they just win outright and play a lot better than the Bucks,
like not beating them. No, I don't see them beating. Do you see them blowing them out that way? I don't.
No, I think the most likely outcome is the Bucks win, a somewhat tight game. Except, yeah, I certainly think the Suns could end up blowing out. So many of these games come down to 3-point shooting variance, especially now. 3-point shooting has become such a big part of the NBA games. And that's one of the reasons we've seen so many turns in these games. We've seen teams, they're down 30 plus points, 25 plus points. They come back to win. And teams that, they basically look dead in the water. The reason being is because the 3-point shooting has become such a big part of the game, but that also introduces a whole lot of variance where, if one team makes 20% of their 3-pointers in the game and the other team makes 40%, 45% of 3-pointers, it's not something that's been that uncommon to happen over the course of the season. Blowouts could happen either way. So I don't think there's any sort of thing where I'd look at this be like, if the Suns win, it has to be a close game or an overtime game. Just based on 3-point shooting variance, anything could really happen.
All right. Are you going to take the 4.5 pre-flop? Are you even betting on anything right now? Or are you just sitting on your hands waiting for this big ticket to cash?
No, I'm not betting. If value is to present itself, I would bet on something. I just don't think there is any great value right now. Like, I think Bucks 4.5. I think that's about fair. I wouldn't have betted at 3.5 before moved to 4.5 either. But just based on how I think the rotation should play out this game, I just don't think the Suns are going to be as aggressive with the starters minutes as the Bucks are going to be with this game. And it's something that I had tweeted this out earlier about what the Bucks rotation was in game 3 against the Nets. And that's what I referenced before. But just because I think the Bucks are going to play their starters this kind of minutes, and I don't think the Suns are as likely to, it's just something I have to give an advantage to the Bucks for that reason, because they're playing with a level of desperation that the Suns don't have to play with. And game 3 against the Nets, Jrue Holiday played 45.5 minutes. Chris Middleton played 46 minutes. Giannis played 43 minutes. Brook Lopez played 34.5 minutes. If they're going to be playing those guys those kind of minutes, I don't think Chris Paul goes and plays 44 or 45 minutes today. And that's really the main reason that I would lean slightly towards Milwaukee in this game.
All right, real quick, before we hit the MVP, and I imagine it's going to be pretty much consistent across the board there, and start looking at captain options. I am curious if you see maybe some value present itself where the Bucks do come out and win, maybe even convincingly get up in the first quarter. That 4.5 might shoot up to 9.5, maybe even 10, depending on that lead, to where you mentioned the 3-point and how that variable can definitely favor Phoenix if they get it cooking there, and maybe 10.5 in game after one would present some value.
It depends what's happening in the game. Like even live bets, here's the things that I think would make most sense as a live bet situation. If somebody gets in foul trouble or hurt early in the game, right? If Giannis picks up 2 quick fouls, then I'd look to Phoenix's side. If something happens where, Booker gets hit in the nose again and has to leave, or Chris Paul picks up 2 quick fouls, that is something that the live lines don't often account for. Those are the type of things that I'd really mostly be looking out for.
All right, so let's look at this here. And, earlier in the day on the strategy show this morning, there was a lot with Torrey Craig because we didn't know how healthy he would be. He's not even probable anymore. He's been removed from that. So the expectation is he's going to be out. So pardon me. So let's get to just him in a second. As far as just the captain slot, first and foremost, I imagine, especially as you've kind of laid out a lot of pathways to Milwaukee, either keeping this close or winning this game, that starts with Giannis really thriving in the captain spot for you.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. First of all, Giannis is definitely the player most likely to end up in the captain spot. Here's one of the issues, though, and it's something that we've seen pop up as an issue in a lot of these games. So I'm going to refresh the ownership just to make sure that I'm looking at everything that's most recent in front of me. But he is going to pick up an insane amount of ownership in the captain spot today. And one of the issues that I've run into a few times in this playoffs is that if there's going to be a massive train that's going to win first place in a GPP, if I'm playing a real chalk lineup, I could play, 20 to 30 lineups, maybe more than that in one of the showdown contests. I could take first place and lose money for the night if I play a lineup that is too chalky. So one of the things that I'm very wary of is looking at some of the ownership projections for Giannis and, seeing that he's projected for 30% ownership in the captain spot. If you're playing cash games, for sure, he is the best choice. But I'm definitely a little bit wary of playing him with a lot of other chalk guys at the captain spot, because it's going to be really hard for that lineup to be not a lineup that a bunch of other people are playing. So if you want to play for safety, play Giannis at the captain spot, but just be aware that it's very unlikely they're going to win a massive first place prize in that case.
All right, so let's look at some pivots here. And again, people popping in. So we're over 1,000 people watching. We should be over 114 likes as we currently sit. So as you pop in the program, make sure you pound that thumbs up, the like button. You're already subscribed. If not, then you should be here to the Awesemo channel and the notification bell so you're not coming in. And I do see you answered it on the chat. Yes, Craig is playing tonight. And it doesn't seem like, just because it was such a big conversation, I think, leading up, because he's so workable at that cost, especially with the return you get. Any concerns about him maybe not playing the ceiling or getting to the ceiling of minutes if he's 75 to 85% simply because he doesn't need to be hitting that ceiling in order for Phoenix to win?
So, it's funny. I was just kind of adjusting my minutes before we started. And I do think that because, like I said before, that I think the Suns are more likely to go to their bench than the Bucks are in this game. Like, I have Torrey Craig in the rotation. I have him playing 9 minutes today. I like Torrey Craig a whole bunch for last game. And, whatever, he hit a couple of threes, and it didn't end up killing me that I had a bunch of Torrey Craig exposure given what his price was last game. I don't know what his ceiling is today. However, I think that there's still a pretty good chance that he ends up in the optimal lineup, just because he's the cheapest player that's going to get minutes today. And I think there's going to be so many heavy minutes going to the Bucks that, if I'm expecting Giannis, Jrue Holiday, and Chris Middleton to all play over 40 minutes, there's a pretty good chance that all of them have big games. And then you just kind of get into a situation where, all right, Torrey Craig scoring 5 or 6 fantasy points, that might land him in the optimal lineup. We saw that in game 1 of the series. Bryn Forbes scored, I think it was 7.7 DraftKings points off the top of my head. He landed in the first place lineup. In the big contest in DK, he scored, he had 6 points and 1 rebound. It was still enough for him to land in the optimal lineup that night, just because so many of the bigger name players went off. You just needed to find salary savings somewhere, and he was the cheapest guy that scored the most fantasy points. And it doesn't have to be 15 to 20 fantasy points. That could very well be 7 or 8 fantasy points if that outscores the other cheap players. And I do think that Torrey Craig is the best punt play for that reason.
All right, super chat, and we'll get back to looking at beyond Giannis, some other big names that you're working, especially if those are some studs in the captain spot, and even follow up with the MVP on FanDuel. Canto Salvo, how many times has Giannis ended up optimal captain in large field GPPs? And I imagine, as you look at that, I imagine it would be a lot, right? Especially as you mentioned, the field and just so heavily owned with our projections at the very least.
For the playoffs,
76.
For the playoffs, I don't remember. So the question was, how many times he landed in the optimal captain spot. So at least in this series, the optimal captain play in game 1 was Jay Crowder. Oh no, it was Chris Paul. My bad. Game 1 was Chris Paul. Game 2 was Jay Crowder. So at least in this series, he hasn't. But over the course of the playoffs, he has a handful of times. If I don't remember exactly how many off the top of my head, though, but he hasn't in this series. FanDuel is different. If the question is it seems like captain spots, we're talking about DraftKings, but for the MVP spot on FanDuel, yes, we have seen Giannis in the MVP spot for FanDuel, but it's not like he's a lock to be the captain optimal on DK by any means.
Right. So just real quick, before we get to some other names that you mentioned to get away from Giannis as far as a captain is concerned, on FanDuel, knowing the benefit there and really what he has to get back, if there's anybody else you feel confident outscoring him, are you more flexible with heavy ownership at the MVP spot with Giannis than you are at the captain spot on DraftKings?
So MVP spot on FanDuel, I find it really hard to play anybody other than Giannis. I just differentiate elsewhere. I have Giannis projected on FanDuel for, let's see, almost 20 more fantasy points, more than the second highest projected player for me in the game. So here are my highest projected players for tonight. It's Giannis 1, Jrue Holiday 2, Chris Paul 3. And by the way, all of the next group of guys, Jrue Holiday, Chris Paul, Chris Middleton, Devin Booker, all those guys are separated by 1.5 fantasy points. And then and then I have Giannis nearly 20 fantasy points ahead of those guys. So there's such a big gap between Giannis and everybody else. I kind of think that you have to play him at MVP on FanDuel. DK is a little different because of the way the salary structure is different. But for FanDuel, I think that Giannis is just by far the best MVP play.
Easiest thing you could do is follow along with the ownership projections. We have Boom Bust tool available for you as well. And nothing free for you today. So just a good reminder, $29.95 for the week. Awesemo Plus, it gets you everything, access to all beyond the NBA, which hopefully for the benefit of both Greg and myself, this thing isn't going on much longer. From a content standpoint, yes, but from a money standpoint, which I'm sure trumps everything for Greg as it does for me, cash those tickets by all means. So you want to make sure you're ahead of baseball as we hit the second half, more in MMA. Football is right around the corner. So just take advantage of every golf, take advantage of everything we have. $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus. And again, just banking off of the ownership projections and looking at it outside of Giannis, who again is over double the ownership prediction, at least on DraftKings. Is it Middleton? Is it Holiday? Kind of keeping with the theme that either Milwaukee is going to be in this game or winning this game. I don't know if it's going to be a Brook Lopez or somebody, Pat Connaughton, breaking the slate. Most likely in the captain spot, I would think, Greg, it would be somebody like Middleton or Holiday that you would at least first pivot away from.
No, actually not for me. Just because the ownership to me is already appropriate. We have Chris Middleton projected for 15% ownership in the captain spot. Drew Holiday projected for 12.4% ownership. And we've got Chris Paul 10.8%, Devin Booker 9%. To me, I think that all is pretty efficient ownership. And then also DeAndre Ayton 8% ownership in the captain spot. That's a little bit high to me, just because I don't think he has quite the same upside as the other pay up options in this game. But yeah, I don't mind going cheaper in the captain spot for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's just going to put you on a different build than everybody else. And then number two, I think that so many of these high-end guys have so much upside today between Giannis, Middleton, Holiday, Paul, Booker as well, that I think there is a chance that you play somebody cheap in the captain spot. If they score even 15 fantasy points, that still might end up being optimal, just because I think there's a chance that Giannis scores over 60 fantasy points. And then all of those other high-end guys, I have all of them projected for over 40 fantasy points. So with that in mind, I think that if we see any of all those guys play to what I think their projections are, there's a pretty good chance you're going to need all of them in your lineup. And that's where you're going to get a chance for, maybe a punt play ends up being optimal, or just one of the mid-range guys being optimal, like we saw last time, where I had said it was Jay Crowder that was optimal, except apparently it was actually Bridges that finished being optimal. I think I remember the optimal lineup going back and forth towards the end of the game, where it was the Crowder lineup and it was the Bridges lineup. They were priced really closely. And then it was the Bridges lineup, and I just remembered incorrectly. But yeah, I think that is certainly something that's in play, and that's something that I want to do for this game, just because I think there's going to be so much ownership going to Giannis in the captain spot. That, like I said, I do think that's optimal. I think that's what you should be doing in cash games, but it's just going to be so hard to differentiate in large field GPPs playing him as a captain.
Is there any scenario where you get to maybe just such a heavy balance, or I shouldn't say balance, but just such a heavy push of Bucks that maybe you do balance that out with Paul or a Booker as far as your captain, knowing that you're going to get to majority Bucks behind him?
Yeah. And then I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that, every single lineup that you build for a showdown contest, the projections are important, but the lineup also has to make sense. So the way that you just described that lineup, here's why it's really sensible. If you have, Middleton, Holiday, Giannis, say all of them in the same lineup, but you're going to need, well, I mean, there are salary restraints, so it's not like you can't just say like, oh yeah, play Devin Booker in the captain spot with Giannis, Middleton, and Drew Holiday in there also. However, if you're going to have all of the heavier lean towards Bucks guys in your lineup, then it probably means that the Suns scoring is going to be focused around one player, right? And that's why it would make sense to have him in the captain spot, because, it's not all that likely to me, just from a game theory perspective, that the lineup that's optimal has Giannis, Middleton, Drew Holiday, like Brook Lopez, and then like two punts or something like that. Because even if the Bucks win the game handily, some production is going to come from the Suns. So yeah, I think in that sort of scenario where you're having more of a Bucks heavy lineup, it would make sense to have a Suns guy in the captain spot.
Yeah, and essentially just kind of looking at a mock lineup as you were talking to make sure that it would make sense from an economic standpoint. And look, this is far from optimal. This is far from me even pushing that this is going to make money tonight, but just from the standpoint of it works salary-wise, you're essentially being able to roster two of the three, right, with Giannis and then either Holiday, Middleton. And then you're looking at keeping it all Bucks. You're probably looking at Lopez, Connaughton, a combination of those guys playing above what expectation is, and maybe getting Bryn Forbes if you can get him as a punt in this case to knock down a couple of threes if he's playing in blowout minutes, or just if, and I know this is a concern because I'm with you, if Budenholzer actually gets to the bench.
Yeah, and I mean that's what I said also when I was referencing the rotations that we saw them play the last time that they were in a game 3 down 2-0. He basically only played the starter. So I didn't give Brook Lopez quite as many minutes tonight as he played in that game because Pat Connaughton's played a bigger role in this series. So, but the last time we saw this happen, Bryn Forbes led all of the bench players in minutes for the Bucks with 15, and Pat Connaughton ultimately only ended up playing 13 minutes in that game. What I done for tonight is I took away a little bit of the 34 and a half minutes that Brook Lopez played in that game, and I gave some of those minutes to Pat Connaughton. But still, if Brook Lopez is going to start approaching the minutes that he played down the stretch of the series against the Nets, considering what his ownership is right now, we have Brook Lopez projected for 1% ownership in the captain spot, 26% ownership overall. He is one of my stronger GBP targets on DK.
Got another super chat here for you, Greg, from D Niz. Also, just seeing more people populating the show, more people watching, more opportunity for you once you arrive to hit that like button. Look, it's not like we're watching you physically. So if you missed it, you've been here for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes, or you just popped in and you think, oh shit, I forgot. It doesn't matter. We don't time you as far as how long you've been in here. All we just ask is that you hit that like button. And of course, you're subscribed to the channel. That's huge for us. And the thumbs up, so you're not strolling in late and throwing out questions that maybe Greg has answered 2 or 3 times over. Pardon me. DK high dollar tournament. Greg, thoughts, and this is from D Niz on the super chat, thoughts on a 5-1 lineup, and this is similar except he flipped it a little bit, where $5, 1 Suns bench player. So I assume that there's going to be a captain in Milwaukee and then somebody that you're throwing in maybe even as a punt on Phoenix.
Yeah, I don't really like that much from a game theory perspective, just because, what is the final score where that lineup ends up winning? The Bucks win by, I don't know, 50, 40 points or something like that. Because, ultimately somebody from the Suns is going to have to take up usage and score the basketball. And it's just because of the correlation purposes. It's not super likely to me that Giannis, Middleton, Drew Holiday all have big games and all of them outscore Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton in such a way that none of them end up being optimal. So also just because of what the pricing is, with Giannis being more expensive than everybody else, $5 starters essentially with 1 player from the Suns that's a bench player. It'd be different if it was, $5 players and it's like, hey, I have Middleton, Holiday, Brook Lopez, and then, maybe like Pat Connaughton or a punt or something like that. But if you're only 1 player from the Suns is going to be a bench player that's a punt, it's just hard to see a game script where that ultimately ends up being optimal.
Yeah, you would need a blowout, right? I mean, you would need Cam Johnson playing both, if it's rotational minutes, and then out there for blowout minutes, or maybe it is somebody even below that, like Torrey Craig, as we mentioned, or Kaminsky playing, 18 shit minutes because somehow Phoenix is getting pounded into the ground, which again, I see, it's not a non-zero by any means, but that Milwaukee winning by 20 tonight would definitely surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, anybody winning by 20 in this game, I don't think is a very likely outcome. And then even if the game is decided by 20, I mean, like it's not like the Suns can't win the game by 20 either. I just don't think that's an optimal lineup construction for a single entry high dollar tournament.
I hustle for it on the super chat. And again, easiest and best way to get our attention. We are grateful for any and every opportunity for you to pop in here on the super chat. So thank you. And I hustle for it. Cam Johnson, just mentioned Cam, for FanDuel at all, at any position. Are you getting to any Cam Johnson at all tonight on your FanDuel lineups, Greg?
So I don't really like Cam Johnson all that much for this late. Cam Johnson's played really well in the playoffs, but he's not great as a fantasy producer. So bringing up his FanDuel total so far for the series and for the playoffs, he's scored, let's see, the high watermark for Cam Johnson in the playoffs was 25 fantasy points, which, listen, if he scores 25 fantasy points, it's whatever. It's not going to kill you, but it's most likely not going to be optimal. But overall, if you look at most of his games, he's been well below that. And also consider the price point for Cam Johnson on FanDuel at 8,500. Once again, it's not a significantly steep price point, But, look at some of the guys priced around him. We have Bridges is only $1,000 more expensive. Jay Crowder, $1,500 more expensive. I think, Connaughton and PJ Tucker are fairly comparable plays for a lot cheaper of salaries. So yeah, I don't think Cam Johnson's a very good play today. The other thing also is if Torrey Craig was going to not play today, and now, he's probably, we're expecting Craig to be out there. Then I think we could have expected, all right, Cam Johnson's going to have to play bigger minutes tonight, because also don't forget Dario Saric in game one tore his ACL, so there'll be a big minutes void to fill. So even last game, there was no Dario Saric. Torrey Craig ended up leaving the game early with an injury. Cam Johnson played 18 minutes. So with that in mind, I don't expect his minutes to go up all that much today, and he's not a great points per minute fantasy producer for the season. Cam Johnson played 23 minutes per game and averaged 17 FanDuel points. So I don't really see all that much upside in Cam Johnson. If he was as cheap as he was in game one of the series, if you remember game one on DraftKings, I think he was he was somewhere in the 2,000 range, and he was also cheaper on FanDuel at early points in the playoffs, but he's been priced up at this point.
So just to that point, I'm curious, and this is me kind of following up with, let's just say, three other guys arbitrarily in his price range on FanDuel from Bridges and Payne that you'd pay just a little bit up. Bridges would be a K, Payne 500, or even pay down with Connaughton at 8K. It seems like all three of them would be better options with your money tonight on FanDuel.
Yeah, so read those names again.
Bridges at 9,500, Payne at 9K, Connaughton at 8K, kind of surrounding Cam Johnson at 8,500.
Yeah, Cam Payne isn't somebody who I really like getting to all that much on this slate either, but certainly Connaughton, PJ Tucker, Bridges, Crowder, those are all guys that I prefer.
All right, one more super chat here from, I assume it's Florida, but FL_void. Would it be best to play Giannis at captain when only playing one lineup in the big one, the 555 contest with 600 spots, 100,000 to first place? This is big money here for Florida Void, Greg.
So let's see. Would it be best to play Giannis at captain when playing only one lineup in the so I think ultimately in the higher dollar tournaments, I think Giannis is probably going to be even more owned at captain. So it depends what your goal is. If you're trying to win first and try to take first, solo, and you're trying to have a unique lineup, don't play Giannis. If you just want to play the lineup that's projected for the most fantasy points, then yes, play Giannis and captain. My preference in tournaments is to not play Giannis at captain just for ownership reasons. But I do think the best projected lineups have Giannis at captain, but I would go elsewhere just to differentiate.
All right, more people popping in, and we see a lot of you out there on the chat reminding them as they come in. So appreciate everybody here reminding the newcomers to hit that like button. We'll do the same. Look, we're over 1,500 people. We should be at a better ratio of just 319 likes. So help us out. We're not asking for much. Greg is not asking. He's not even asking for your undivided attention, right?
No, I'm not asking. I'm not asking for it. Well, listen, here's what I'm asking for. I'm asking you to ask us questions to help us along with the show, right? And then troll me when things go poorly. Those are the only two things I ask for. But like the video also, because that's what Eytan's asking for.
Please, that's all I'm at. I'm not putting up a pic of my son or any of these other bullshit. We're just asking you simply. We don't dumb it down for you, right? We're not reducing it to anything LCD. Just simple thoughts on hitting the like button. Gerardo asking my thoughts on Kaminsky at a home game. Went to Wisconsin. Look, I don't care if Budenholzer is his dad, or in this case, I guess on the other side here, Monty will, whatever it may be. Like, I don't care if he's related to the general manager. I wouldn't get anywhere near Kaminsky if I was playing with Ehrenberg's money.
Yeah, so here's the issue with Frank Kaminsky, right? Actually, there's a few issues. With
Everything,
Kaminsky.
Isn't it?
So I think all of us thought there was a chance last game Frank Kaminsky could be in the rotation just because Dario Saric was out, and we saw it in game one of the series after Saric tore his ACL. Kaminsky played 4 minutes, right? So with that in mind, there was a chance that, hey, maybe they want to go to Kaminsky. They play him 6 or 7 minutes, and just with the way that the salary shakes out, right, at a min price type salary for Frank Kaminsky, maybe it's a couple of shots that's enough to land him in the optimal lineup, a la what we saw in game one from Bryn Forbes. However, Frank Kaminsky in this series, game one, plays 4 minutes, scores 0 fantasy points. Frank Kaminsky, game two, plays 1 minute, scores 0 fantasy points. So here's the issue. Number one, I have no clue if he's going to be in the rotation or not tonight. My gut feeling, he's more likely to not play than he is to play. Even if he gets into the rotation, there's no guarantees he scores fantasy points because we've seen him play 5 minutes now in the series and he hasn't put up any fantasy points. So yeah, with all that in mind, I personally don't have Kaminsky in the rotation today. I gave him 0 minutes. Obviously, one thing that's a little difficult though with rotations is that they're very variable. When we have to set a minutes number for each player, there's only one set of minutes I could give to everybody. And there is a greater than 0% chance that Kaminsky ends up in the lineups, but I'm in the rotation, but I personally don't have him in lineups tonight.
All right, let's get back to a little bit of the breakdown of the rotation that you talked about, especially because there are two themes that are under the same umbrella, which is, and I'm just repeating what you said at the start of the show, Phoenix more likely to get to the bench sooner and just in general, and then this realistic concern based off of what Budenholzer has done in the past in this situation, right, where the rotation gets tightened up. So that leaves us with guys kind of in the middle, right? Not the Pauls, the Middletons, the Giannis's up there. And I don't know. Let's start with somebody who's probably on the bottom of the top tier. And I'm just curious, even if it's working him in tournaments as a captain, do you see yourself getting to DeAndre Ayton much tonight, knowing that, he's probably on that middle tier of ownership, 9K on DraftKings, and not super owned at the very least as far as a captain on DraftKings?
So here's the issue I have with Eytan personally. And also I've been too low on him over the course of the playoffs in terms of how I've projected him, but I gave him 40 minutes tonight. But even with that in mind, and this I don't think is controversial to say, I have Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, and Giannis all projected for more fantasy points than Ayton. And then also you look at where he's priced around all of those guys. He's in that same pricing tier. So if you look at the salaries on DraftKings, with Ayton at 9,000, we've got Drew Holiday's only $200 less. Middleton's only $600 more expensive. Chris Paul is only $800 more expensive. It's really hard for me to prioritize Ayton when I have all these guys projected for more fantasy points at around the same price tag. And then, Ayton he's projected for 43% ownership. So it's not like he's some massive contrarian play or whatever. So to me, he's very low priority compared to those guys. And he's picking up 8% ownership in the captain spot. So I don't really like Ayton much today. I would prefer to go to any of the other guys in the high end. He certainly has upside, but he's not my choice for today.
Two tools you can use on top of the cruncher, of course, alongside the show tonight. And you'll see him pop up with Jordan producing as well. The ownership projections, the boom bust tool. It's $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus. If you want to bump it up to Awesemo Plus Platinum, then of course you've been hearing about this deal. Why haven't you taken advantage of it? It's quick, it's easy. NBA live before lock. That's the name of the show. It's all one word. It's caps. It's so easy for you to just type in at checkout and you'll get your first week 25% off. So that's pretty cool. Just put in that code and you can bump up from Awesemo Plus to Awesemo Plus Platinum. And again, NBA live before lock is the code, and you'll see immediately the benefits of continuing to step up here on and really take advantage of everything we have here at the Awesemo community. All right, so beyond DeAndre Ayton, and that was, again, kind of just the last guy, if you will, from a price standpoint, at least in that higher range. Torrey Craig, we'll get to in a minute, right? He'll be kind of pushed in the bottom, especially with so much ownership that he's getting. But now we're in this Crowder, Lopez, Bridges, I imagine at 7,200 is just going to be so much cost to work with. And then Pat Connaughton, who's kind of on the bottom of that middle before you really get to that punt. So there is this meat here. And I imagine that Connaughton is definitely going to have big minutes tonight in order for Milwaukee to be in this game and compete. 43% ownership, though, is that something that you're working with in tournaments?
So Pat Connaughton is somebody who I'm underweight to, and I don't feel great about it, but I feel like it's something I kind of have to do relative to how the Bucks handled their rotation in that game 3 against the Nets I referenced before, where Pat Connaughton, we started to see his minutes get cut. So if we go back to that series against the Nets, Pat Connaughton played bigger minutes in earlier in the series. And then we saw him, his minutes weren't all that substantial in the series. But either way, he only played 13 minutes in game 3. Game 1 in that series, he played 20 minutes. And then game 3, when they were down 2-0 in the series and they really prioritized playing the starters, we only saw 13 minutes out of Pat Connaughton. I didn't give him that light of minutes. I gave him 25 minutes. But just given what his ownership is, there's other places I'd rather punt with than Pat Connaughton.
Is 3,800. That's what I guess I was looking at, because if you get, and look, this is contrary to what Budenholzer has already done. So I don't have a clear path here to this already happening, but I would think that if there's anybody that he's going to go to off the bench and that has the chance to play 28 to 30 minutes, it would be Connaughton. And at 3,800, wouldn't that be worth the return? Now, again, this is all predicated, Greg, on him playing those minutes that you have maintained multiple times, especially with history, wouldn't happen. Again, I'm just playing it from the tournament angle of him coming out and getting those minutes, maybe in an unexpected standpoint.
Yeah, so the issue, though, is the field does expect him to get those minutes. Connaughton is projected for 43% ownership, and he's projected to be a fairly popular captain at 4%. So relative to the field's expectation, that's why I'm just lower on him than the field. It doesn't make him an outright fade or anything like that. But for me, I don't think he warrants 43% ownership when we could see his minutes decline.
And just on the flip side there, from a cost standpoint, as Bridges at 7,200, just to kind of talk about him and knowing that he's been in that optimal lineup game too, or that captain role you mentioned. And I don't know what type of game, maybe even better than he had already to pay off at 7,200. So is the number itself a deterrent, or maybe the fact that he is so high and in return more low owned on this slate, something that you can get around and work with that cost?
And by the way, also, I just want to address, because just so I'm clear, I don't think that Pat Connaughton is unplayable. I'm just saying, because somebody was saying in the chat, like, oh, don't fade Pat Connaughton. I'm not saying fade Pat Connaughton. I'm just saying I like him less than the field having him in half their lineups. Like, I would rather go to, by the way, so Torrey Craig is comparable ownership to Pat Connaughton. I'd rather take him for the cheaper price tag. I'm not sure about his health, but I'm not sure about Pat Connaughton's minutes either, but there's a 2,800 price difference between them. I'd rather take a chance on even PJ Tucker at a slightly more salary, just because he only has a fraction of the projected ownership that Pat Connaughton has. Same goes for guys like Jeff Teague, Britton Forbes, guys who, I think could play 10 to 12 minutes and are substantially cheaper than Pat Connaughton. Pat Connaughton, once again, he's okay to play. I just don't like him as much as the field does at 43%. I don't have Pat Connaughton in my single entry lineup tonight.
Oh, no. So no cash lineup for Connaughton, even with the, because I guess to your point,
in cash, I think you have to play Connaughton.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misheard you. I apologize.
Yeah, I don't play cash games for single entry slates, but if you are somebody who plays cash games, like, I would let the ownership guide you, and he's so popular. And that's also why a lot of people say, like, oh, what, like, I'm playing this lineup for cash games and GPPs. They're totally different strategies and totally different formats. Like, the optimal plays in cash games are different than the optimal plays in tournaments. The main reason being is that if somebody projects to be very highly owned, that will often be reason that you just have to have them in cash games. But that could also be reason that, I want to be underweight to the field to them in tournaments. So Pat Connaughton also, regardless of what I think of his minutes tonight, everything is a break-even point. So given that he's in nearly half of the field's lineups, that is a number that I want to have less of. However, if Pat Connaughton was, say, 10% projected ownership, without changing anything in my minutes expectations for him or changing anything in my projections, I would then want to be over the field on Pat Connaughton. But just because he's so popular, I don't think that he's warranted with the kind of ownership he has.
Yeah, what is, and again, I didn't even think that was something that would be interpreted that way, where you laid out the ownership like 50, you could be at 35% of Pat Connaughton compared to 50%, and that's still pretty underweight to the field. So I don't know how this narrative developed on the chat that Greg says, stay the hell away from Pat Connaughton or you're burning your money up. And it's even now people are fighting and picking up for you on this whole thing with Connaughton. So listen, I think it was like one or two people out there, maybe it was a troll. I don't know who it was, but I don't know where that came from, because I just assumed you could be anywhere from 25 to 35% and still pretty underweight to the field.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, and just referencing, so like, who was it? So Zach Pinkleton in this chat said, every time that he watches me, he feels like I hate every play. Yeah, maybe a little bit of exaggeration, except especially because, okay, so here's the kind of content that we're doing right now. We're doing baseball content, which is very ownership dependent. And we're doing a lot of it. Well, actually, okay, all the content I'm doing is basketball and baseball content. So, but all the basketball contests right now are single game contests. And a lot of that is dictated based on ownership and not expectations for players. And the same goes for baseball, where it's very dependent on ownership and which spots do I want to be overweight to the field on, which spots do I want to be underweight to the field on. And for that reason, very oftenly, I'm just not going to like a lot of the super chalky players that I think have a lot of variance in these kind of games. So my actual favorite player, just so I'm not totally make it seem like I dislike everybody, I'll say my favorite play in this contest is actually Brook Lopez relative to his ownership and the fact that the last time we saw the Bucks in this same sort of elimination situation, we saw Brook Lopez play massive minutes against the Nets. So Brook Lopez in that game against the Nets, and once again, I didn't project him for as many minutes as he played in that game 3, but Brook Lopez against the Nets played 28 minutes in game 1. He played 26 minutes in game 2. And then in game 3, he played 34 and a half minutes. And that was kind of what he played the rest of that series. So I didn't give him quite that many minutes, but still relative to ownership, even giving him a couple less minutes than that, I think he's a very strong play and has better odds of landing in the optimal lineup than what his ownership is.
Are you getting, and again, this is not a pay up for somebody like Giannis, who we know, or even as you mentioned, if it's a Booker or somebody else who's going to get you a significant return back at the captain spot, nor a punt if it's Connaughton or Craig and just trying to work in a bunch of super high cost guys on your lineup. Is Lopez, based on how you see him play out, pardon me, is he not worth maybe a look or two in a tournament as a captain?
I like him as a captain play. I mean, we've seen Brook Lopez with pretty significant upside at times in the playoffs this year. And if you look at Brook Lopez's ownership today, 26% owned overall in utility on DraftKings, 1% owned the captain spot. FanDuel is going to be different. There's no reason to play in the MVP spot because his odds of actually being the number one overall scorer in the game, that's close to non-existent. But we've seen Brook Lopez have, pretty big fantasy games. And we even saw him land in the captain spot. Where was it? It was game 5 or game 6 against the Hawks in that series. Brook Lopez ended up being the GPP winning captain. It was a game where there was no Giannis, but even with that said, we've seen Brook Lopez with big upside in the playoffs. So I think he's a better than 1% chance of being in the optimal lineup today.
Canto's back on the super chat. I just saw something though. Mike Demopoulos asked a question just kind of in general. And I think this is interesting because Bobby Portis has been relegated now to useless, and some of it may be just as far as how they're attacking him. The other, of course, the more obvious reason is because Giannis has taken back those minutes, and he just asks, why can't Budenholzer figure out how to use them both on the floor together? I would just say, deferring to you, of course, Greg, I would just say, if he does, or if Budenholzer ever does figure it out, tonight wouldn't be the game to bank on him doing it.
So the question is, why can't he figure out how to play Bobby Portis
with Giannis at the same time? And just,
all right. So, the answer is pretty simple. Like, Bobby Portis isn't any good, right? Like, if you look at Bobby Portis, like, there's a reason that Bobby Portis has played on a bunch of different teams. There's a reason why he didn't first get like significant minutes in the NBA until he punched Nikola Mirotic in the face and broke his nose, and then or broke his jaw. I forget exactly what the injury was, but he punched somebody and then he ended up getting minutes. But there's a reason why over the last 4 years he's played on 4 different teams. He's played on, or in the last 3 years he's played on 4 different teams: the Bulls, the Wizards, the Knicks, and the Bucks. It wasn't because everybody had Bobby Portis on their team. It was like, oh, this guy's so good, we have to keep him. He's a pretty massive defensive liability. So the real reason that he can't be on the court in the playoffs in a lot of these games is just because he can't defend anybody. When Giannis was out, they just had such a void in the front court. They had to give somebody minutes because Giannis is playing over 40 minutes per game, that a lot of those minutes had to go to Bobby Portis. And when Portis is on the court, he's a good fantasy producer. So I think a lot of us look at some of the fantasy stats and we get a little jaded in terms of what Bobby Portis is as a real life player, because we've seen, those games where Bobby Portis started in place of Giannis in that game against the Hawks, and he's played 36 minutes. He scored 43 fantasy points. But, in general, Bobby Portis isn't a very effective real life NBA player. And that's the reason that we don't ultimately see him get a lot of minutes more often than not.
We're going to get to 2 more guys here in that 6K and kind of mid-range. But remind everybody, of course, tonight's show brought to you by Monkey Knife Fight, and we have something for you, of course, here. Prop-based contests across the board. They're easy to play. You don't require all the time commitment that you need at a bunch of these other DFS sites. And it's easy here at Monkey Knife Fight because you're in charge. And it's, again, NBA while it's still here, UFC, golf, esports, soccer, everything you need, Monkey Knife Fight has it. And, of course, you can head over to monkeyknifefight.com and use our promo code Awesemo, and you'll get an instant first match deposit of up to $100. So you put $100 and we'll match that $100 with Awesemo. AWESEMO is the promo code to jump in. I did see it. It's amazing how these things all originate and then blow up into conversation. But I saw, again, I think this might have been either the same person who was coming at you for redlining Connaughton. Of course, you were not. And saying that you were rattled and all. And then somebody else was like, nah, dude, Greg did stand up in New York. Like he doesn't get rattled. And I saw you mention that you have some stories. And look, I've been doing radio from, New York to Philadelphia to satellite for dog. And I've had my back and forths and curses and people calling me an idiot and even beyond all the MFs that you can get. I still don't think it's probably as bad as being heckled at a comedy club, because it's almost like, I don't know, that back and forth right there can take over, and it's just you and you're right up there. And I can't even imagine that, man.
No, I mean, I'm pretty sure I told the story, with you. I did a show in SantaCon where somebody came up to the stage and threw up. I've had that. I've had, you also like there are just times it goes poorly for whatever reason. Sometimes people just don't give a shit. They don't like you. You don't vibe. Like there's a whole bunch of reasons it can't go well, that it might not go well. I did a show once at a sports bar. Everybody was there to watch the Jets play on Monday Night Football. And the people who were there, they showed up to watch Monday Night Football. They didn't even know there was going to be a comedy show going on. And the guy who owned the place, he was like, hey, guys, guess what? We're turning off the football game and you guys are going to watch comedy now. Wasn't happy about it. The people who came to the bar to watch comedy. So to watch a football game, and now all of a sudden they're stuck watching comedy. So all of them instantly hate me. There's no chance that's going to go well after that. So yeah, I've bombed a gazillion times. If people don't like me in the YouTube chat, listen, I would like everybody to like me, but I don't expect everybody to either. And also there's an expectation of, if I'm talking about players and each individual player every night, I'm going to be wrong all the time. I'm going to be right more often than I'm going to be wrong. But, I have to be prepared to be wrong. And I have to also be prepared that people are going to get mad at me and troll me and be angry about when it goes wrong. So it comes with the territory.
Did you have any type of, and it didn't even need to be specific as far as like it memorized, but did you have any type of go-to type backup set if you ever had to deal with a heckler, where you just had some sort of mode you can go in and maybe fall back in a couple of ways that you can embarrass? And again, all the variables change depending on what somebody looks like, sounds like, how drunk they may be. But did you ever have something that you had kind of in the bag where it's like, all right, man, if I get an asshole, I know what to deal with? Or is it just natural?
No, you just respond to people. And a lot of times people aren't reasonable when they're drunk anyway. Like there's no reason with a drunk person who doesn't like you. And a lot of times people just have to be, kicked out. But hey, listen, who are some of the players?
See?
Yeah, often, because if people are going to be, like unruly and looking to fight people, then there's not really all that much you could do about it. But I did want to ask, because somebody asked a question, what do I feel about Mikal Bridges today? And that's another guy who I think is going a little bit under-owned in tournaments. So Mikal Bridges is right now projected for 25% ownership in that mid-tier price range, where if I don't think the bench guys are going to get a whole bunch of run today, then the places that I think are most sensible for value are Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, and Brook Lopez, because those three guys are all not super cheap, but they're reasonably priced, and they're all guys that I think stand to play a little bit more minutes today. And that's something we saw last game from Mikal Bridges and Jay Crowder. With no Dario Saric there, we tried to figure out where those minutes were going to go to. And it's not like Saric was playing, even 20 or 25 minutes, but even with him playing 12 minutes per game, those minutes had to be allocated somewhere. And a lot of them went to Mikal Bridges and Jay Crowder last game. So we saw last game, Bridges played 37.5 minutes. Crowder played 37 minutes. Massive workloads for both of them. And I think we're going to see something similar today. So those are two guys that I do like in the mid-range that are sensible salary saving options.
All right, following up on that point, Blackbird 15 on the premium Slack, FanDuel Cash Bridges or Crowder? Leaning Crowder. Rebound rate is up without Saric, or just coincidence? So FanDuel cash lineup, Bridges or Crowder?
I have Crowder projected for slightly more fantasy points, but I think both of them are two of the strongest plays at the utility spot on FanDuel. Actually, I think those are the two strongest utility plays on FanDuel today.
I saw it earlier where I just want to make sure that it didn't go up, but I saw it earlier for Crowder at 10.5 points as far as his prop. Yeah, it's still at an odd shopper, of course. Over 10.5 points, you can get at plus 104 at a couple of books. And if you're running with him like that, I would think that is maybe a prop that interests you in going over.
Which was I'm gonna pull up the which was the prop you liked?
Crowder over 10.5, just based on you talking about getting to Crowder and looking at him in your DFS lineup. The number seemed a little low with the expected minutes for him.
I have him projected for 13.6 points
there
today.
You go.
So that is a number
You're
that I would
like 3
full
points over that.
Yes. Yeah, I like that a lot.
And you get plus money, which I know you love.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing too is I think the books are still a little slow to adjust to a couple of things. Number one, that Jay Crowder is actual raw points average in this game in this series. It's not super high, but he made 0% of his shots from the field in game one. He's a better than 0% shooter overall. The other thing also is then in game two, his minutes got all the way up to 37 minutes. It was the second most minutes he's played in any game this entire postseason. And one of the main reasons he played so many minutes was because there being no Dario Saric there, like we said before. Those minutes have to go somewhere. And, a lot of times we do expect in those situations, hey, just a backup guy is going to play 12 minutes. That wasn't the case. They mostly just gave Bridges and Crowder some extra run.
All right, Jets World playing in the 555 on DK. Should he play Lopez, Bridges, or Crowder at captain, or just stick to one of the top 4 or 5 studs? Hashtag going for the win.
Was this in Slack? It's hard to remember all the names.
Yes, the premium Slack. Sorry.
All right. Should I play Lopez, Bridges, or I have Lopez projected for the most fantasy points of those guys. And like I said before, I like Lopez as a low owned captain play. I think he's a sensible way to differentiate.
All right. Yeah, that was also in the Slack. He followed up on that. So just looking at the difference, right, between that. Is there anybody from, I guess, down at the bottom, and this is, I guess, where Torrey Craig, Bryn Forbes, this is where anybody becomes workable more often than not, maybe even in your optimal lineup, super low-cost guys?
So Torrey, if I have to pick one punt guy to play, I think Torrey Craig is the best one to go to today, just because he's so much cheaper than everybody else. And, his minutes are definitely a little bit uncertain with the knee injury. However, he's a flatman salary on DraftKings. So with that in mind, he could go out, he could score 5-6 fantasy points. That might be enough to land him in the optimal lineup if enough of the high end guys do well. So yeah, I think that Torrey Craig is a fine punt play. I like him quite a bit.
And real quick, by the way, we only have about 6 minutes left. So we have over 1,600 people, not at 500 likes yet. I think that's definitely attainable before we get out of here. There is something kind of back to strategy, and I've heard you mention this on shows that I've done with you on the one game slate, as well as those that I've watched you do leading up to lock, where, and it's something that you've mentioned and kind of reinforced to people, where it's okay to leave salary on the board. This is not, you need only $500 to $800. Like, you can leave some money on the board. Is tonight one of those games where you do see yourself leaving, especially if there is a Craig that you're getting to in a punt standpoint? Maybe you're leaving 2 to 3K on the board and still a pretty damn good lineup that you've created?
So the lineup that I have projected for the most fantasy points on DraftKings leaves $1,900 in salary on the table.
All right. So I'm guessing that's pretty consistent then for you. To where it's been in the past.
not necessarily like that every slate, but yes, for this one.
For tonight, right.
Yeah, and part of the reason also is because I've Chris Paul projected for more fantasy points than Devin Booker. I have Drew Holiday projected for more fantasy points than Devin Booker. So just with that in mind, those guys are much cheaper than Booker. So that's something that ultimately leads to my personal top projected lineup, leaving a bunch of salary on the table.
Are you getting to much PJ Tucker tonight with the cost there?
Not not
in
much.
either league.
I think he's playable, but not like a high priority player or anything. Just because PJ Tucker, he's a decent source of salary savings, but the upside is a little bit limited with him. He's more of a floor play than a ceiling play. If you look at his fantasy production, though, over the course of the last stretch of the playoffs where he's been starting now, he averages about 14 fantasy points per game, which is probably enough to min cash, but it's probably not enough to be a GPP winning lineup, unless he just outscores all of the other cheap guys by a certain margin, and then his salary just fits. But I think he's about appropriately on. That's a neutral play.
What about, and just real quick, and again, because it's back to Torrey Craig at 7K, Tucker 7,500 on FanDuel. Is he any more appealing on FanDuel as opposed to with DraftKings, Tucker?
Yeah, I do think Tucker's a little more viable on FanDuel just because there's a salary difference. So on FanDuel where he's 7,500, there are some lineups where I think his salary just kind of becomes essential. And also on FanDuel, we're kind of comparing PJ Tucker to Torrey Craig. Those are the two cheapest viable players on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's a little bit more expensive relatively. So with the price point of PJ Tucker at 4,200, then you're getting into a spot where, the difference between him and Torrey Craig, the 3,200 salary difference, that comes into play is pretty important with all the high end guys to pay up for.
And I did see, I know we talked about Giannis just across the board, especially when it comes to cash, but maybe in tournaments, a couple of people were asking as far as any other pivot, just to bring this back before we shut down and lineups lock, any other pivot that you would have besides Giannis as the MVP in tournaments on FanDuel? If that even exists.
Not for FanDuel. And listen, I understand he's going to be popular on FanDuel, but to me, it's just justified at that point. I mean, I actually think if anything, he's projected for 54% ownership in the MVP spot on FanDuel. I just say differentiate elsewhere because like I said, I haven't projected for almost 20 more FanDuel points than anybody else on today's slate. So I think he's very, very likely to be a high scorer on the game. So I kind of think you're forced to play Giannis at MVP on FanDuel.
Jeff Williams, real quick, sneaking it in on the super chat. That's good strategy, Jeff, knowing that we still have a couple of minutes here. Payne Connaughton or Bridges Craig in the 555 DK?
Bridges Craig. And then I'm going to mention one thing too, because somebody was bringing up the with Torrey Craig before. The reason that Craig is in play today is not because I think he's going to have a massive game today. The reason that he comes out well in projections in terms of an optimizer is just because he's so cheap on DraftKings. Torrey Craig could legitimately play 5 minutes, score 3 fantasy points, and land the optimal lineup just because of what his salary is. It doesn't have anything to do with liking Torrey Craig as an individual player, thinking he's going to have a big fantasy game. He might not even be in the rotation. He might score 0 fantasy points and land in the optimal lineup. That is something we saw happen in the Nets Bucks series. There were games where players did not play in the game. They scored 0 fantasy points and they were in the optimal lineup just because the high-end guys did really well and you needed the salary saving somewhere. And this could be that type of game.
Man, I think we covered everything. Is there anybody else? We hit Bryn Forbes. We hit everybody. Is there anybody else that we did not hit? I think we hit every single person, and you faded as many people as you possibly could. No, I'm kidding, of course. I don't want to open up a new door on the chat that people are going to come back to you on your next show and say, why did you fade Pat Connaughton? So we hit everything, brother, right?
Yeah, just a real quick answer. Jumpo in the in our premium Slack chat, he asked Lopez or Crowder in a small field GPP. I have Lopez projected for more fantasy points. And then Told to God, he asked CP3 or Middleton at captain for DK GPP. I have Middleton projected for more fantasy points.
I'm just curious, by a lot, or is it pretty narrow, the difference between Middleton and CP3?
No, I have. So I'm pretty sure I brought this up earlier, but Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, I have all of them projected within about 1.5 fantasy points of each other. There's very little differentiation between them.
All right, that's it for us. Make sure you thank Jordan in the chat. Make sure you leave us with a like and you are subscribed. If you aren't already, then what are you waiting for? The notification bell so you don't miss our next live before lock. We're back Monday, jam-packed, starting in the morning with a lot of activity. I'm sure you're back, right? Soon, if not tomorrow on the channel. Do you even know?
No, there's no baseball tomorrow. There's no basketball tomorrow. So I don't have anything to do.
Enjoy, man. Go. Don't you have another birthday to celebrate or something?
It is. It's my brother's birthday. I think we're going to go see Black Widow in the in movies. But yeah, I mean, not in terms of content. There's no sports to do.
Hey, even more reason to go out and enjoy yourself. Honestly, we had enough this weekend, including tonight. So we appreciate everybody at Ehrenberg DFS, at Shander Show for me. Good luck to everybody. Thanks for riding with us.